Hello and welcome to episode 36 of Question and Answer. I am your host, Panyo Basa, and I'd like to make a little disclaimer before I start in on these questions, this veritable cornucopia of questions. My consciousness expands and contracts like the Buddhist cosmos, although at a much higher rate. It doesn't take zillions of years for this to happen. And it just happens naturally. I mean, there doesn't necessarily have to be any obvious external cause for it. And right now, I'm in a kind of a contracted phase. It may be partly just because of the dark, wintry weather that has started recently or something. I don't know. But I'm going to do the best I can. My general intelligence remains the same. It's just that I won't be as spunky and perky. I won't be frolicking in my seat as much as usual. Also, for various mysterious and arcane reasons, I skipped a week, and so it turns out we've got lots of questions. We've got the veritable cornucopia. And so I should start answering questions. And if I'm like too verbose, it's like I'm drawing out the questions, taking too long, just like wave your arms at the screen and maybe it'll help. So the first question is from Chakra Gosha, who has changed his name again. I don't remember the new name, but this is the name that he was going by when he asked the question. I almost knocked something off the desk by waving my arms. So Chakra Gosha says, do you think there is a fundamental difference between Theravada Buddhist ethics and Mahayana Buddhist ethics? Mahayanists sometimes portray Theravada as self-centered and uncaring about others, contrasting with the Mahayanist dedication to liberate all beings. However, I'm never sure to what extent this is just a hostile caricature of Theravada. Do you think it's true that compassion and empathy are less emphasized in Theravada ethics? Well, yeah, there are differences. I think there's more similarities than differences between Theravada and Mahayana, since Mahayana is just a further development of schools that were similar to Theravada. And I mean, you go far enough back, it all arises from the same root. But yeah, there are differences. Like Mahayana has this weird illogical dedication to saving all beings that according to most Mahayana philosophy don't exist, that these beings are ultimately empty or void, which doesn't necessarily mean just blank nothingness, but we needn't get into that because that's not what Chakra Gosha was asking about. So you've got Mahayanists emphasizing compassion and vowing to postpone enlightenment for the sake of liberating all beings that ultimately don't exist. Right? From the Theravadan point of view, you liberate all beings by liberating yourself. But let's see. So, in a way, that's like the main ethical difference, at least with regard to practice, between Theravada and Mahayana is Theravada is dedicated to becoming enlightened in this life, which may require some apparent selfishness, where you're just going off and doing your own thing because solitude works better for striving for enlightenment for ancient Indians anyway. Whereas the Mahayanists are doing essentially the opposite of what the Buddha was teaching in the earliest texts and postponing enlightenment indefinitely until an infinite number of beings are liberated, and just going with logic. This universe has already been here for an infinite length of time, and there are still apparently an infinite number of suffering beings. So, if an infinity of time has already passed and there's still an infinitude of suffering beings, there's always going to be an infinitude of suffering beings, seems to me. It is true that Mahayanists can get kind of snarky and make fun of the Theravadins. Although the Theravadins, if you read the text, they did the same thing for non-Buddhist philosophers. Just made them look like there was the six heretical teachers that in the text they're portrayed as pretty much like the Three Stooges, Laurel and Hardy plus Gilligan. So, yeah, I mean, Theravada can seem selfish. Like, for example, like a classic case, I've mentioned this before, is that, I mean, a monk can sit on the bank of a river and watch a pretty girl drown just because he doesn't want to break the rule by touching a pretty girl. And that's pretty selfish. I mean, if it were me, I'd just take the hit, rescue the pretty girl, and you know, who knows? You might even have to do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation or something. But you just do the penance afterwards, and you know it's good. And you're probably earning merit by saving somebody's life anyway. Although again, monks aren't supposed to earn merit. Merit is for lay people. You know, good and bad are both. They're both karma, and you're supposed to be getting rid of all of your karma, or at least transcending all of your karma. You're not supposed to be making new karma any more than is necessary. So, yeah, I'd say with regard to the fundamental difference, I think the only real fundamental difference between Buddhist ethics and Mahayana, or Theravada Buddhist ethics and Mahayana Buddhist ethics, is that Theravada Buddhist ethics say you should strive to become enlightened in this very life, whereas the Mahayanas are saying, nope, just postpone it indefinitely. And yeah, I think that would be the real, like the radical difference. And the rest is just a matter of emphasis. You know, Theravada emphasizes compassion. The Buddha was motivated by compassion to teach the Dhamma. It's anukampati is the verb, to feel compassion. So it's like, I think literally means something like shaking after or trembling after. You know, it's like concern. You're trembling with concern for the welfare of all beings or some such. But I'm starting to be verbose. We've got lots of questions. And so I'll just move on to the next question, which is by Jazz. And I believe Jazz is staying at a monastery in Asia right now. So good for him. And Jazz asks, how did you deal with foot warts and other injuries to your feet while a monk? And then in parentheses, he's got red ants, bugs, etc. I never had foot warts. I don't know. I think it might be a genetic thing or something. I don't know. I've heard of people that get really painful plantar warts, but I never had a wart on my foot that I can remember. But I went barefoot for 30 years. Like during the 30 years that I was a monk, up until the very end, where I was staying at this monastery in California that had these little pointy burrs or little pointy seeds, like spiky little seeds everywhere. So I had to wear shoes whenever I was walking around there, at least outdoors. But up until then, I'd wear shoes on average about twice a year. And at first, I was living in a monastery called Chaltsin Doya in central Burma. And it was called a forest monastery, but it was really like a desert wasteland monastery. And it was just jagged rocks everywhere. And my first year there, at least, I would have at least 2 bloody toes at any time. I was always stubbing my toes on rocks because I don't lift my feet very high when I walk. But I mean, it's just like a baptism by fire. You know, you just have to learn to be careful. And I remember when I was a kid, my father used to say that natives in Africa go barefoot so much that the bottoms of their feet, the soles of their feet, toughen up like shoe leather. And I just naturally assumed when I stopped wearing shoes that my feet were going to toughen up likewise. And they did toughen up a bit, but it was nothing like shoe leather. And mainly, you just learn the instincts of walking barefoot. I think we probably have a lot of latent instincts and reflexes for walking barefoot because most of our human ancestors went barefoot up until they migrated up into northern climates, I assume. And so you just learn how to walk carefully. You learn how to, like if you're walking on rough ground, you just learn to put the whole foot down, you know, like not going down heel first or toes first. You just put the whole foot down to kind of distribute the pressure evenly. And you just learn to always be looking down, or looking down every few seconds, just to make sure you're not going to step on anything pointy or icky or bitey or stingy or anything like that. And that's really all I did. I mean, you get bitten by ants sometimes, um, but I mean that's rare, especially with regard to your feet. There was one kind of ant in Burma. It was a kind of swarming ant, almost like little army ants. They're called miebidu in Burmese, which means ground hornets, and they just swarm. I mean, it was just amazing sometimes. And those kind of ants, as soon as they touch you, they bite. And they're kind of like a bed bug. They don't search around looking for a good place to bite. It's just as soon as they come in contact, they bite. But there's other kinds of ants. Like there's like a big orange ant called a kajin in Burmese. And they live up in trees a lot. And they make nests by kind of gluing leaves together into a football kind of a thing. And they can get all the way up to the back of your neck before they start biting. But it's just a pinchy bite. They don't inject any kind of formic acid or anything like the little ones do. So yeah, it's like the foot warts. I didn't deal with them at all because I didn't have any. But other injuries to my feet. I mean, you can step on thorns. I remember one time at this same monastery, Chaltsindoya, uh, the, the the desert wasteland monastery. They had a lot of cacti and acacia trees that had like big wicked thorns like this. And I stepped on one when I was going for alms round in the village about a mile and a half from the monastery. And it went way the heck up inside my foot, like at least an inch, and then broke off. And I'm just like limping home. And it stayed in my foot for probably 2 weeks before finally one day I was just trying to squeeze some goop out, and then pop out came this little black remnant of a thorn. But that's what you do. You just deal with it. So I think I'll just move on to the next question, and that is from Lunar Vibes. And Lunar Vibes says, you mentioned that there is a branch of Buddhism being developed that believes that there is an individual self. I'm very interested in this because I have always interpreted the doctrine of no self as no self-consciousness. For example, when a solo violin player has to perform, it is important not to be aware of yourself so you can give your best performance in that moment. I think we have all experienced something like that in our lives. Become too aware of yourself during an activity and you mess up, and will become too aware of yourself during an activity and you mess up. Still, in my view, there is an individual spirit performing. So I would definitely like to read or hear more about this kind of Buddhism. Does this branch of Buddhism have a name? Or could you give me some names of writers, philosophers, researchers supporting this type of Buddhism? Well, I'm not sure that there is any branch of Buddhism that endorses the idea of an individual self, like an ultimately real individual self. In ancient times, there was a sect of Buddhism called the Pudgalavadins, and they taught that there was a Pudgala, which is like an individual being, but they couldn't say there was an Atta or Atman or a self, because that was just, I mean, it was just orthodox doctrine of Buddhism going back to very early times. So they couldn't say there was a self. They'd have to come up with some different word and kind of engage in a little careful sophistry to avoid being too unorthodox. And then they could say, well, there's a Pudgala, and I don't even know if this Pudgala was ultimately real or not. But that branch of Buddhism died out, and I don't think there's a whole lot known about it. But nevertheless, I've caught in hell from some Pure Land Buddhists. Some Pure Land Buddhists, especially Western ones, just vehemently insist that there is some kind of ultimately real self. Although it tends to be the case that these individuals, real or not, they're going for more of an Upanishadic idea of self, where it's just like there's this pervasive ultimate reality, and the part of it that's pervading us can be called our soul, our true essence, something along those lines. But getting to like the violin player or, someone who's dancing or doing anything really well, yeah, you can't be self-conscious about it. You can't be like even driving a car. You can't be thinking about, yeah, now I should turn this way, I should shift, or I should hit the brakes a little more. You just do it without thinking about it. And I assume an enlightened being would be that way pretty much all the time. So yeah, it's like the idea of self. It's the idea of self that gets in your way, and yeah, I mean that's in all Buddhism. So this self consciousness thing, I mean that's true of Buddhism. I mean it's in there, but the no self is more radical than that. It's thought that there's a real being that isn't aware of itself, like perceiving itself as a self. That really, everything is just interconnected, and you can't postulate some discrete entity that is separate from everything else. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Athena's Sigil. And this is, I've considered maybe whether I shouldn't just leave this one out, but Athena's Sigil might want to know, So Athena's Sigil says, one thing that I've taken away from your videos is the obvious Buddhist teachings, and in particular to the Theravada interpretation, but I've also been watching and reading about Burmese culture, and in particular the temple complexes strewn throughout Southeast Asia. It's utterly fascinating, so much so that I've purchased numerous books on both the teachings of the Buddha, Sutta translations, and the ruins architecture of the region. Will you ever dedicate an episode or two to the temples, monasteries, and other holy sites of Burma or Myanmar? And that is a good idea. So, yeah, I'll probably make an individual video where I just sit here and talk about that one topic of the temples, monasteries, and, pagodas, shrines, that kind of a thing of Burma. I can't really speak of other countries because I lived in Burma for like 24 years, and I lived in Thailand for maybe 3 weeks. Never been to Sri Lanka. So yeah, that's something that I can almost sort of promise that I'll do within the next 2 weeks or so, is make a video where I just sit here and talk about, like Buddhist shrines and monuments and so forth of Burma, kind of in a historical manner. Because there were the Nuns in the south and the Pews in the kind of the west, and then the ethnic Burmese came down and kind of conquered the northern territory of the Pews, and they all had their own styles and their own kind of thing that they were doing. So yeah. Thank you, Athena's Sigil, for suggesting that. It is a good idea for a topic. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Mary, spelled Merry. And Mary says, is there any way to lose monk status other than by committing parajika? Well, you can drop out. That's one way of doing it. Now all you have to do, it's not like you take vows. People used to they used to talk to me about, vows. You're breaking your vows or something. But monks really don't take, Theravada Buddhist monks really don't take vows. So if you are ordained, you're a monk. But all you have to do is just tell somebody that you're not a monk anymore and mean it. And they understand what you said, and that's it, you're not a monk anymore. But I think Mary was talking about ways of just getting booted out, being excommunicated. And there's only one way I know of. Like the government, even though they've done it in like Thailand and Burma, technically they do not have the authority to force you to stop being a monk. I think in Burma, one of the things that they would do is they would just have the monk raped by a prostitute or something. And then that would be, he would be parajika. He would have, if you have sex, then that's it. But there is one way. It's. I think even most monks are unaware of this. But there's one other way of being like excommunicated, where you're no longer a monk anymore, and that is to lose your balls. If you lose your balls in some horrible accident, then that's it. A eunuch cannot be a monk. I mean, if somehow through like paranormal means, all of a sudden, poof, you go from male to female, then you're a bhikkhuni. I mean, you're an ordained nun. But if there's any interval in between where you're not male or female, completely male or female, that's it. If you lose your balls and you don't just instantaneously become a woman, then yeah, you're out. With all due respects. So I'll just move on to the next question. Who chose your Pali name? That was my preceptor. When a monk is ordained, or when a lay person is ordained to become a monk, he has to have a preceptor who is like responsible for making sure that he learns what he needs to learn and so forth. It's like a teacher, like a spiritual father kind of. And my spiritual father was an old Burmese monk named Sayadaw. I think his Pali name was Sandasiri or Chandasiri, which means like moon glory, something like that. And he's the one who chose my name. I would have called myself something different than Panyobasa. But before they named me, first they asked me what day of the week I was born on, and I didn't know. In Burma, everyone knows. But it turns out that it's just Burmese tradition that the name, like the first letter of your name, depends upon what day of the week you were born. So I was born on a Thursday, and if you're born on a Thursday, your name can start with P, B, or M. And so they went with Panyobasa. And then so later on, when I'm in Burma, someone would ask me what my monk name was, and I'd say Panyobasa, or in Burmese pronunciation, it's Pinyobatha. And they'd say, you were born on Thursday. But that's maybe TMI. So who chose my Pali name was my preceptor, who was an old Burmese monk named Santi Asoke. So I'll just move on to Mary's next question. Any thoughts on Dogen Vimalaramsi? He is from some Burmese tradition. He says that some people are becoming enlightened on his 7 or 10-day retreats. I don't know, ... Well, he wouldn't be Dogen Vimalaramsi because he is Burmese, so it would be like Sayadaw U Vimalaramsi. And I'm pretty sure he had a meditation center in Rangoon, in Burma. And I'm pretty sure he was a monk in the Mahasi tradition. So he'd be teaching some variation of the Mahasi tradition. And I had a few people suggest that I go there. It is kind of like a, not very well known, but it does accept like international meditators and people who want to be ordained as monks. And that's really about all I know about it. I'm pretty sure it's some variation of the Mahasi method. And with regard to people becoming enlightened on his 7 or 10-day retreats, yeah, I don't know either. I'd be even skeptical of even a high number of people becoming like Aryas, below enlightened in 7 or 10-day retreats. Although the Mahasi method did, like some Mahasi meditation centers did acquire a kind of reputation for being Sotapanna factories. Just, you got the meditators come in this door, and then they come out, a month later as Sotapannas out this other door, is just cranking out Sotapannas. And it used to be you'd even get a certificate, like a Sotapanna license, like a diploma or something. But they don't do that anymore, and I'm very skeptical of any sort of system that makes claims like that. So I'll just go on to Mary's next and last question. And Mary says, from cold Alaska to cold Washington to blazing hot central Burma to hot California to South Carolina, what climate do you prefer the most? Do you like snowy, frosty winter? Well, it's true that I was born in Alaska, although I moved from Alaska to Washington State, the Pacific Northwest, like near the coast, Grays Harbor County, town of Aberdeen, home to Kurt Cobain and Nirvana and all that. And I just kind of grew up there. It was sort of where I was raised. And I guess I just got acclimated to Pacific Northwest weather. And it used to be And I think it may still be that my favorite kind of weather is like, it's like completely overcast, but it's like white. It's instead of like a golden light from the sun, it's more of a silvery bright white. And there's like a coolness, like a bracing coolness and wetness in the air, which is it's really common in Aberdeen, but not so common in like central Burma. Um, Hot weather is fine. I mean, I can take just about any kind of weather, but hot, humid weather, it does wipe me out pretty bad. And so, of course, I moved to South Carolina where the summers are very hot and very swampy. But I'm not complaining at all. It's very nice living in South Carolina, especially because it's firmly a red state. It's a conservative state. Like I voted last Tuesday during the midterms, and like at least one third of the people running were Republican incumbents running without any opposition at all. I mean, the Democrats just figured it was no point to even trying. So, yeah, I mean, blazing hot, I don't like. Freezing cold, I don't like so much. Just pouring down rain all the time, I don't like. Blazing sun with no rain, I don't like. As a good Buddhist, I just follow the middle path. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Sacha, spelled Sacha. And Sacha says, what do you think of non-duality? And then in parentheses, he's got Eckhart Tolle, Rupert Spiro or Spira, Francis Lucille, etc. Well, I mean, I'm well acquainted with Eckhart Tolle. I've seen a few of Rupert Spira's videos. And Francis Lucille, I've never heard of before. But non-duality, I mean, if I think of non-duality, I just go back to Shankara, in India, like Advaita Vedanta. And I think he's like the non-dualist par excellence. And I think he was influenced by some Mahayana schools, like Madhyamaka especially, I think. But yeah, I think that's correct. I think I would be ultimately a non-dualist. I mean, when you're dealing in samsara, the worldliness with books on the shelf and everything, then of course you've got to be kind of a dualist. It's either the book you're looking for or it isn't. But yeah, I think non-duality here. It's. I mean, there's different ways you can interpret non-duality. Like non-duality and duality sometimes just means that mind and matter are like just ultimately different from each other. That there's, they're not. One of them is not just assuming the form of the others. Like non-duality would be like Spinoza or something, or I don't know. But what do I think of non-duality? Yeah, I think ultimate reality is non-dual. That there is an absolute that is just beyond like human perception, and duality has to be it's an artifact of human perception, because human perception it's like namarupa, where or papancha sankha is another term in Pali, where first you concentrate and you discriminate something, and then you slap some kind of meaning onto it, and the meaning might just be what is that? It's some kind of a that you don't know what it is, but still it's a that. It's that thing or whatever, whatever that is. Still, you distinguish that from the whole rest of your field of view or your field of perception, and then you attribute some significance to that. And that's just an artifact of perception. I mean, you can't really have distinctions without relations, like same as, different from, bigger than, smaller than, all of that kind of stuff. And all of these relations that are necessary for you to perceive anything distinct, it's just an artifact of perception. That like a chemist can analyze some kind of matter, some substance, and he can separate it out into its individual components. And he's not going to be able to isolate pure same as or different from, because it's just not there. It's in your mind. So yeah, I think ultimate reality is non-dual, and it just transcends even the duality of is and isn't, which is one reason why Buddhism doesn't really talk much about the ultimate, and even like an ultimate personal essence, like the self, the ultimate reality. I mean, you can't say that it does exist. You can't say that it doesn't exist. You can't say that it does and doesn't exist. You can't say that it neither does nor doesn't exist, because it's completely beyond perception. Anything, you can't stick labels onto it. It just doesn't work. It's like trying to stick tape onto a powdered donut. It's just not going to work. So, with regard to Eckhart Tolle and so forth, I mean, whether they're really enlightened or not and that kind of thing, it's not really the question here. Apparently, they're teaching some kind of non-duality also. But I'll just go right back to Vedanta and say, yeah, I can agree with that. Although still, Vedanta does stick a label onto the absolute and call it Brahman. And even that is really kind of an error. So I kind of like the Buddhist preference. Just, I mean, they've got the idea of Nibbana, but it's more of an ethical state than a metaphysical state. And they just kind of leave the absolute alone. They don't stick labels as a general rule. I mean, because it just doesn't work. I mean, anything, it's going to be different than you can imagine. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Outer Haven. What are your thoughts on David Cole, the notorious revisionist? Have you read any of his books or seen his YouTube videos? Well, at the time that Outer Haven asked this question, I had never heard of David Cole before, but I did look up a few of his YouTube videos. And I read about him on Wikipedia. And so, yeah, I mean, he's entertaining. My girlfriend can't stand him, and so I've got to watch his videos by stealth, when she's not around or something. But he's funny. I mean, he's good at telling stories, and you got some video. He's going to talk about the Holocaust or something, and the first 30 minutes are just him talking about some guy cutting his trees. Just this funny, I mean, just complete digressions. So it's hard to get to the meat of what he's saying. Maybe in his books, he just gets right to the point. But in his videos, he's just all over the place. He is entertaining. He's funny. But what little I know about his revisionism, I don't think he denies the Holocaust. I think he's kind of along the lines of like David Irving. There's maybe not even as extreme as David Irving. Certainly not as extreme as my buddy Brian Ruhe. But I mean, I think he just reduced the number from 6 gorillion down to 4 gorillion or something. And it may be that he says a lot of the same things that a lot of other people like revisionists are saying. Like what was it? Dachau wasn't really a death camp; it was just a labor camp, and the gas chambers were. Most of the gas chambers were constructed by the Soviets for like a concentration camp museum in Poland after Poland got absorbed into the Soviet sphere of influence and so forth. So yeah, I think he's pretty tame actually. But I mean, if you deviate at all from the standard narrative that is well established from right after World War II, then you might get called denier, or you're peddling misinformation or some such. So let's just move on to the next question here. This is from Ricardo. And Ricardo says, are you familiar with Dogen Zenji? If so, what are your thoughts on him? When I was in college, I was just taking an interest in Buddhism and starting to read books on the subject. I don't remember the name of the book, but it was by Dogen. And Dogen was like a medieval Japanese, he was the founder of Soto Zen, I'm pretty sure, in Japan. I think he went to Korea or something and studied under some master there, and then came back to Japan and founded the Soto Zen school. And at the time I was impressed. I mean, he seemed wise and knowledgeable, but the only specific account that I can remember from reading that book, which again was like, I was like 19 years old, so that was ancient times, is there's a story of a monk who was like wanting to eat like raw meat and drink raw blood. And then I think it was Dogen himself who walked into the room while this monk was eating, and he saw there was some kind of little demon on top of his head that was actually eating the meat and drinking the blood. So that's kind of interesting. But yeah, that's really all that's all I can say about Dogen is, he's medieval Japanese Zen monk who founded the Soto Zen school. And he did write at least one famous book that I have read, but it was so long ago that, yeah, I've forgotten almost all of it. So I'll just move on to the next question here. And this is from Alan. So Alan says, what's the point in reason for having a bicentennial flag or whatever that American flag is in the background? What does a flag have to do with Buddha or Buddhism? What is the Betsy Ross flag? The flag we now call the Betsy Ross flag is a circle of 13 5-point stars in a blue patch on the top left corner, 13 alternating red and white stripes cut horizontally through the rest of the cloth. The Continental Congress called for such a flag on June 14th, 1777. I think this flag, this Betsy Ross flag, I think it comes from around the War of 1812 or something. Maybe not. Maybe they already had more than 13 colonies or states by the War of 1812. But the thing is, I'm a patriotic American, and I feel more comfortable getting an old flag that kind of represents what America used to be like, rather than taking pride in what America is becoming now. I like what the founding fathers stood for, what they represented. I mean, slavery, yeah, you were better off without that. But still, I mean, their idea of, governance by the people, which is, it's just off the rails now. But I think it was a good idea. And I'm a patriotic American. So I just got this flag, but we don't have a proper flagpole. And so my sweetheart just kind of folded it up there. She thought it looked nice there. And I think it does look kind of nice there. And our next door neighbors, they've got a Gadsden flag, the snake. They've got that just hanging from the front of their house. This is South Carolina, buddy boy. And you take issue with an American flag in this room. What does that doorknob there have to do with Buddhism? There's books on the bookshelves that don't have much to do with Buddhism, if anything. What does that mirror have to do with Buddhism? Look at my hand waving in the mirror there. What does that have to do with Buddhism? It's not necessary for everything in this room, just because I do videos here sometimes, to be Buddhist specifically. And I would suggest to Alan here, he's been kind of spamming my comments, like going back to old videos and leaving comments about how I'm too political and this and that. But nobody's forcing you to watch it that I'm aware of. If you really disapprove, then you're not required to watch. But I'm not going to just talk only about Buddhism. Sometimes I do, but not always. So the next question is from Lucid. And Lucid says, how much backlash do you, and then parentheses, and Brian Ruhe, get from other Buddhists because of your views? Have you ever been fired or forced to resign like he has? Well, yeah, Brian, he's just persecuted. He's just kicked off every platform. Even free speech platforms will kick him off sometimes. And, yeah, he was, kicked out of, Buddhist groups. He lost his job. And, yeah, it's really too bad. He's really a harmless person. He's got some strange ideas, but, he's not advocating violence in any way. He's not advocating hatred in any way. So, yeah, Brian has got some bad karma, I guess. But as for me, I've never been fired or forced to resign like he has. My views aren't as extreme as his. And I do try to be careful about what I talk about on YouTube, especially because really it's very censorious. You can get in trouble for just telling the truth sometimes. So, but partly I was a monk the whole time. If I hadn't become a monk, there is a good chance I would have become like a university professor, like now an unemployed university professor. Like, I got a degree in biology. Probably I would have continued with, ecology or something like that. And then as a biologist, being required to call male students she, I might just, I'm just really not into that. So, um, yeah, I might have been fired or forced to resign if I had not become a monk. And now I'm just living in, redneck land, which is where I prefer to be. So, yeah, I think probably possibly the owner of the company might be more of a radical redneck than I am. Bless his heart, he's a good man. Also a devout Christian. There's a lot of that in South Carolina also, which is really not so bad, even though I'm not a Christian. So, yeah, I think I answered your question. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is kind of an easy one. This is from OFM. And OFM says, I don't know what OFM stands for. OFM says, have you ever come across the book Nirvana Sara by Da Free John? And I've never read anything by Da Free John. I may have seen it at a spiritual bookstore before. I just remember one time I was in Bellingham, Washington. I think I was in college at the time. And I walked into the spiritual bookstore of Bellingham, Washington at the time. And he was still called Bubba Free John back then. It just struck me as just delightfully absurd. I assume he's one of the people, like some of the people mentioned above, like Eckhart Tolle and Rupert Spira, that are kind of declared to be or declaring themselves to be enlightened beings. But yeah, that's about all I know about him. He was kind of a character, kind of eccentric, maybe a con man. Maybe really he had some kind of experience that put him above the ordinary normie. I have no idea. So I'll just move on to the next question because sometimes people ask me, what's your opinion of my Aunt Mabel or something? I've never heard of him. I don't know. I'm sure Aunt Mabel's very nice. I'm not trying to criticize your Aunt Mabel. So this next one is from Maitreya Buddha, which is I'm honored that Maitreya Buddha would ask questions on this show. And Maitreya Buddha says, why are Buddhists against astrology when the Buddha's mother consulted with an astrologist that predicted Siddhartha would either become a great king, emperor, or a great spiritual teacher? That's why Siddhartha's father did his best to keep Siddhartha in the palace so that he would be a great king, emperor. Well, I really don't want to correct Maitreya Buddha, that's kind of sacrilege or something. But actually it wasn't astrology. It wasn't an astrologer. Maybe he was an astrologer, but he wasn't practicing astrology when he was looking over the baby Gautama. It was the marks on his body, which is not astrological. So he examined the marks on the baby's body, and then he started crying, which frightened the parents. So they're asking, what's wrong? And he says, oh, no, there's nothing wrong. He's just going to become either the king of the world or else he's going to become a fully enlightened Buddha. And I'm not going to live long enough to see it happen. That's why he's crying. So Buddhists are against astrology. Well, if you go to Thailand or Burma, probably Sri Lanka too, there's astrologists everywhere. So the average person is very much into astrology. There's lots and lots of astrology in Buddhist countries, but Buddhist monks aren't supposed to be practicing it. They're not supposed to be giving it any attention because it's, in Burmese, Pali, it's tirasana weza, or animal knowledge. It's just irrelevant to enlightenment. So, even practicing herbal medicine, that kind of thing is out. Consulting girls in trance at a seance is another one. You're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to be playing board games. You're just supposed to be just single-mindedly practicing towards enlightenment according to the texts. So, that's what that's all about. And the next question from Maitreya Buddha is Buddhism nihilistic? And this, I get it. So many people say that, Theravada Buddhists are nihilists. They're nihilists because they say that there is no self. And I've already gone over this. It's in the texts themselves. There's two extremes in the suttas. This is mentioned numerous times. There's sasata ditti, or the view of eternalism. Like after you die, you have this spirit that exists, eternally. And then you've got Uchedavada, like the Uchedavadis, or Ucheda ditti, which means cutting off, which means when you're dead, you're dead. And these are extremes. This when you're dead, you're dead. This Ucheda ditti is nihilism. It's called nihilism, where after death you're just annihilated. Although it could be that nihilism could also, or nihilism. Some people say nihilism, that it's that nothing is real. And that is, you're getting into tricky territory there, because again, Buddhism doesn't deny that there's an ultimate reality. It's just that they don't try to reify it because it's just totally off the scale. It's non-dualistic. So I would say Buddhism isn't nihilistic. That nihilism is one extreme, eternalism is the other extreme, and Buddhism follows the middle path, which relies upon dependent origination, dependent co-origination, paticca samuppada, where everything is conditional and virtual. And in a way it's real, but it's not real in and of itself. It's real only in the context of everything around it. So it's not really nihilistic, although people, especially Western Buddhists of a sort, or Western Buddhist authorities of a sort, who just vehemently insist that we've got an eternal soul, they'll call anyone who denies that a nihilist, although they themselves have got the extreme view. So I'll just move on to the next question. And this is from Stevens. And Stevens says, somebody asked me whether or not reincarnation happens in some sort of linear time sequence, or if you can get reincarnated at various times out of sequence. Like one time I got reincarnated in the Middle Ages, then the next time I got reincarnated 100 years from now, then the next time I get reincarnated as a caveman or a dinosaur or something, etc. Well, my father had that view, actually. He considered himself to be a Buddhist, but his Buddhism was pretty sketchy. He learned most of what he knew about Buddhism, I'm pretty sure, from a dead Vietnamese monk being channeled through a spirit medium. And his understanding of Buddhism was pretty sketchy from my point of view. But if you go with just Orthodox Theravada it says that really the past doesn't exist, the future doesn't exist. All that exists is now. Sort of like Eckhart Tolle with the power of now. All you have is now. And so that couldn't work in accordance with Orthodox Theravada. That it would have to be just in a linear sequence, because Theravada has more or less of a Newtonian understanding of space and time. Although, if you set aside orthodoxy, you try to be a free thinker and all that, then it's theoretically possible, I suppose. Although it's kind of weird to think that, your last life when you became enlightened was like 2,000 years ago, and you're still just struggling and floundering. So, yeah, it's kind of tricky. It's hard to say. But from the Orthodox point of view, the answer is that this would be impossible, because time is sort of Newtonian and only the present exists, and it's kind of moving, forwards into the future and all that. So it would have to be in a linear sequence, going with orthodoxy. But I'm not particularly orthodox, and I'm open-minded on the subject. I don't know how it could work that way, but lots of things. I don't know how computer chips work either, but they work. So there you are. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Shrumo. And Shrumo says, have you met someone you thought might be an arahant? Was there anything that stood out to you about them? Well, I've met a few people that had reputations for being arahants, although that doesn't mean very much. In a Buddhist country, I mean, in some parts of Burma, I was considered to be an arahant. Or there was this one arahant, or this one monk, I should say. Someone was really keen on taking me to see this monk, and he's talking about how he was an arahant, and I said, "Are you sure?" And he's, "Yep, I'm sure he's an arahant, all right." And we get there, and it was like a circus. I mean, it was like, just crowds of people, and you got the alchemist guy with the white suit and the beads and everything, the long beard, and they're just building pagodas and stuff all over the place, statues everywhere. And this monk came out, and I mean, it was like 11:45 in the morning before he started eating. And I mean, a monk's supposed to stop eating at 12. One of the first things he did, he comes out and sits under this pavilion. He blows his nose in his hand and just wipes the snot on the wall. So, yeah, I mean, just because someone's considered to be an arahant, I mean, they're not necessarily an arahant. But possibly the most advanced monk that I have met was Shui Umin Seattle. I met him once. And he was the teacher of the famous Utejaniya, who is the leader of Shui Umin Meditation Center in Rangoon. Although Utejaniya really does not have a very high reputation outside of, or inside of Burma. Outside, he's all the rage, he's in fashion and all that. But in Burma itself, people really do not have a very high opinion of him because he's just he's not a scholar. And in Burma, I mean, to know the text backwards and forwards is considered to be, a sign of being really literate and all that. And I don't think he was nearly as advanced as his teacher, Shui Umin Seattle. But I met Shui Umin Seattle once, and he was maybe 90 years old at the time. And he was with another monk who I think was around the same age. And Shui Umin Seattle, he's just right wide awake. I mean, he was sharp as a tack still. And this other monk sitting next to him, I mean, people had to yell into his ear in order for him to hear anything, and still they're not sure if he heard or not. I mean, he was just kind of, he was definitely in severe decline. But Shui Umin Seattle, he was just very, I mean, he wasn't teaching me secrets of the universe or anything. I just happened to meet him. We just happened to be at the same place at the same time. And he just seemed very calm, very alert, just right there, And I've met other monks who said that of the monks that were alive at that time, Shui Umin Seattle had the reputation for just being, the most, like the likeliest bet of one who had really attained something really advanced. Before that was Webu Sayadaw. He was considered by some people to be an arahant, but he died before my time. So that would be my guess. I mean, so he might be an arahant. It would be Shui Umin Seattle, but he's not alive anymore now. Of the people who are alive today, I really couldn't say. So I'll just move on to Shrumo's next question. Is Burma a good place to go for ordination? I've been warned by friends about the political situation going on there. He said that there are terrorists there that target the monks. Well, there may be insurgents there who target foreigners just to kidnap them and sell them for ransom. But that would be in insurgent zones, and those are mostly off limits anyway. So if you're going to be going, a Westerner is going to go to Burma to be ordained as a monk, he's pretty much going to be limited to, safe areas and forbidden to go anywhere else. A few times I just decided I was just going to go to a brown zone, which is sort of a borderline area between insurgent zones, which are black zones, and the white zones that are safe. And yeah, it's like that you get chased down by the secret police or the immigration authorities, and they'll send you back to Rangoon or whatever. So like I say, I lived in Burma for 24 years, and there were times when there were protests and then, soldiers shooting protesters and all that. And, it's localized, it's not completely universal across the country. And most Westerners who go to Burma to be ordained as monks, they go to like international meditation centers in Rangoon or closely associated with places in Rangoon that are safe. Nothing dangerous happens there as a general rule. So when you hear all this stuff about the political situation, a lot of it's propaganda. I mean, there's this little old Burmese lady who, bless her heart, she's hasn't given up on me, even though I'm not a monk anymore. And she writes to me sometimes, and she's saying that there's places where villages are just depopulated, and soldiers really are just shooting people in the streets and so forth. But I assume that would be very localized, and I think the terrorists, um, as a general rule, they'd probably be on your side. I don't know why I would think that. It's like I don't know. I mean, Americans or Westerners, we're kind of seen as um, kind of a possibility that things will get better in Burma, although they don't necessarily get better. Even, I mean, as soon as Burma became more liberalized and opened its doors to the West, immediately you've got like the charitable organizations and just feminists and stuff just swarming into the country and just trying to turn Burma into some fucked up Western liberal society with decadence and chicks in miniskirts and orange hair and all that. I think it's better just staying traditional. In a way, a bad military government, it's saving Burma spiritually by keeping out the McDonald's and the Walmarts and the uppity feminists and so forth. Really, I mean, it's like a lot of I didn't really start interacting with Western expats in Burma until around 2012, and it's sort of like colonialism all over again. It's like I met the leader or the director of Save the Children in Burma, and he's living in a mansion with like a swimming pool and a tennis court and servants. I mean, it's like how much of the money that you donate to these charitable organizations just gets siphoned off into these guys who they don't speak Burmese and they don't associate with Burmese people other than servants as a general rule, unless they're just really westernized Burmese people, maybe rich or something. And then the women, the bored housewives, are like starting up feminist organizations, and you're trying to teach the relatively content women of Burma that they shouldn't be content because they're second class citizens or something. But anyway, I mean, if there's people being shot in the streets, just sort of widespread phenomenon of that, then you might be better off going to Thailand instead or Sri Lanka. But it worked really well for me. My time in Burma worked well. I was under investigation on political charges by the secret police once, but they did a professional job, and they could see easily enough that I was just minding my own business out in a cave in the woods. I wasn't trying to overthrow the government or anything. So, yeah, I mean, if you should just, I mean, it's hard to say for sure. Probably you should contact a meditation center there, and they'll give you this straight news. But looking at ordinary news, if Burma's ever mentioned, it's like sensationalistic propaganda stuff, you know. So anyway, I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Rafi46. And I've been at this for about an hour, and we're about 60% of the way through this veritable cornucopia of questions. Rafi46 says, was there anything that touched you emotionally when you first read about the life of the Buddha? That's kind of a nice question. And not when I first read about it, but I remember one time I was riding a bus through Burma, just sitting in the bus, looking out the window, and I was thinking about, the Buddha's renunciation, how he renounced his life, essentially, his wife and his infant son, against the wishes of his father, and just goes out and just starts practicing severe austerities. I was getting really emotional just thinking about that. And there's one thing that I read about the death of the Buddha that really moved me emotionally, and that's the Buddha's his final attendant. He had attendants before Ananda, but his final attendant for the past several years or maybe a decade or two. I don't know exactly how long Ananda was his personal attendant, but Ananda was the Buddha's personal attendant at the time of his death. And he was Ananda Gautama. He was related to Gautama Buddha. He was Buddha's cousin. And sometimes in the text, the Buddha will call him Gautama. And anyway, after the Buddha dies, Ananda, there's this scene where he's just standing alone against a post crying. And part of the reason for that was that he was so busy being the Buddha's attendant that he didn't really have time to practice to the point of enlightenment. So he wasn't enlightened yet. And so, if they were enlightened, they see, all forms are impermanent, and, this is just the way it is. But that was moving for me. I mean, Ananda, he really had his human side. He had a reputation for kind of having a soft spot for women too. And he's the one who talked the Buddha into allowing nuns to be ordained, that kind of a thing. He'd get in trouble sometimes for being too friendly with nuns and so forth. But the Ananda crying. And just thinking about the Buddha's renunciation, he must have missed his wife and his baby boy and all that. He'd be thinking about them when he's starving himself out in the woods. So anyway, I'll just move on to the next question from Rafi46. And this is a really easy one. What are your thoughts on Santi Asoke? And I have no idea what Santi Asoke is. Is it a person? Is it a metaphysical state? I don't know. Santi is like, I assume it means peace. And Asoke is like sorrowless peace. Sounds good to me, but I really don't know what the reference is to. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Das Boot. And Das Boot says, this is something I've been thinking on for a long time. Years ago, I stopped accepting any horrible processes like surveys or loyalty cards. I don't know what a loyalty card is. And as corporate hell has evolved, I've gotten more and more allergic to its insanities, inflexibility, and in general inhumane approach. One might say that there were historical precedents like decrees from a king or such, but still these things are all pervasive now. Would the technology and remoteness itself represent a twist of sorts on emotions or clashes of interest that before were resolved directly? At least for me, these things feel like their destructiveness is way harder to defend myself against, as well as analyze. Any input around this would be appreciated. This is kind of it's hard for me to wrap my hand around this question. The main part of the question here is, would the technology and remoteness itself, like of postmodern digital information age interactions, I guess, represent a twist of sorts on emotions, clashes of interest that before were resolved directly? So it's like alienation, I think, like how instead of just sitting around talking, you're just looking into your phone or whatever. Would the technology and remoteness itself represent a twist of sorts on emotions, clashes of interest that before were resolved directly? Yeah, I assume there's a greater distance between people now than there used to be. Partly just, it's not even like the technology, it's just individuality, like modern Western liberal civilization puts a lot of emphasis on individuality. It's like you are an individual, a free individual, supposedly. And people just didn't think that way up until relatively recently in modern times. It's like, back in the day, people identified more with their clan or their tribe or just their family than with their individual self. They were just a part of the family. And also I had this image arise just thinking of this, that just the remoteness, in a way it's made war a heck of a lot more dangerous, because war back in pre-modern times, back in ancient times, is guys stabbing at each other with spears like face to face, maybe some archers and slingers, but as a general rule they're looking each other in the eyes when they're killing each other, and that kind of toned things down a bit, I think. Whereas now, a lot of people that are in the military that are killing people, they're not even seeing who they're killing. They're just launching cruise missiles or seeing a blip on a radar screen and launching a missile at it or something. So yeah, I mean we're definitely alienated, and I don't know. You can't. It's hard to say even if the way before we this wasn't really natural, because we're kind of an artificial being, and not that we were genetically engineered by space aliens necessarily, but we're. I mean, our instincts have been totally modified. Our lifestyle's been modified by culture to such a degree that we're living in kind of an artificial reality, just with all the straight lines and right angles and laws and statutes and stuff. But to the extent that technology is inspiring a kind of separation and alienation between people, yeah, it's not necessarily a problem. I mean, it's like one of my favorite mottos is it doesn't matter what it is. If you accept it, it's not a problem. And it doesn't matter what it is. If you won't accept it, it's a problem. So, yeah, it's not necessarily a problem. I mean, it's definitely a change that either you adjust to that change or you just go off and, live in a log cabin and with a wood stove, fetch water and with a bucket. That can work too. I mean, that's not necessarily a problem either. But I'm sorry, I really can't answer this question in depth because it's really hard for me to fully wrap my head around it. Maybe it's just not enough information, or the information is expressed in such a way that it's hard to sink in for me or something. So I'm just going to move on to the next question here. This is from KitKat 108. And KitKat 108 says, what is the best advice to someone going through a breakup and you still love them? If you could elaborate further, it would be appreciated. Thank you for doing what you do, Panyo, from my heart. Well, one thing to bear in mind is that love is separate from the emotional attachment. I mean, the emotional attachment is kind of an instinctive love. It's like a human mating instinct. But genuine love in the spiritual sense is just like open hearted acceptance. And so, even if the person leaves and you don't even necessarily want them to leave, then, I mean, you can still love them. It's just the acceptance is still there. I mean, forgiving them for whatever they do isn't going to, I mean, it's invaluable in a relationship, but it's not going to help if they're just going to leave you anyway. I mean, you just forgive them for, running off with somebody else or something. But yeah, I think that's one of the most important things to bear in mind is that genuine, true love is partly, I mean, for starters, it's unconditional, or as unconditional as you can humanly manage. And it's just not the same as the attachment, the emotional attachment. Because the emotional attachment is what causes the suffering. It's like, that's like in the Four Noble Truths, like all suffering is caused by attachment. That's one of the variations on the second Noble Truth. It's either craving or it's attachment, just clinging, just insisting upon things being a certain way is what causes suffering. So apparently it's like the karma is exhausted or something, and it may hurt because due to karma, like just the power of just the force of habit or whatever, there's the clinging and the suffering, but it will pass. And the love is just not the same thing as the the emotional attachment. And I was gonna say something just now. Damn. Let's see. Love, acceptance. Yeah, I'm sorry. That one I just lost it. But I mean, love is good. I mean, if you can perfect love, that's enlightenment. But I mean, it should be as unconditional as possible, which means even if they treat you badly or dump on you or whatever, I mean, that's just part of the practice. That's in a way, it's a powerful spiritual practice trying to use like romantic love as a spiritual vehicle. Very challenging sometimes because you're just dealing with another person who's not under your control, and they can just do all kinds of things, and I mean, you can get upset about it or you can accept it. And that's on you. So, yeah, I'm sorry that someone is going through a breakup and they still love them. It's better. Ultimately, it's better to go through a breakup with you still loving them than just turning it into hate. True love. It doesn't really cause pain unless it's just the compassionate kind of suffering with, you're just feeling another person's suffering, in your own heart, like compassion, genuine compassion. But it's not the actual love aspect that is causing the pain of separation. It's the emotional attachment, which, in Pali, like genuine love would be like metta, but the kind of romantic, passionate kind of attachment, the emotional attachment stuff, it's called like prema or sneha, which anything called sneha is not going to be very good. So I guess I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Arain. And Arain says, why does abstinence and moderation exist in Buddhist teachings while at the same time there have been and are many sex cults and gurus within Buddhism and Hinduism promoting group sex and sex with teachers? Is this just left over from the East-West exchange that took place via the hippie movement, or is there supposed to be some dharmic path in cuckolding men and turning women out to religious leaders? People like me who are skeptical of humans running religion see these scenarios play out over and over through our lifetimes, and it plays a large part in our skeptical nature via organized religions. How did this sexual dynamic play out in ancient India, or is this just more American sexual relativism corrupting authentic Buddhism through men who are using Buddhism and other religions as a mean to cultivate their own sexual addictions? Part of the issue is the bad behavior itself, and another part is the hiding, denial, and or enabling of it from the people in authority. Well, with regard to sex cults in Buddhism, I assume they exist. You've got Tantra that can be abused, but it's just certainly not built into Buddhism. It's not like, there's anywhere in Theravada Buddhism saying, sex is good and you should do it as much as possible, anything like that. In Hinduism, maybe more. There's more of an emphasis on romantic love in Hinduism. Like there's the idealization of Krishna and Radha, who weren't even married, but they were lovers, that kind of a thing. And that can, get distorted into, justifying that in some kind of, religious group or something. But in Theravada Buddhism, I've heard of a few cases of like just kind of rampant illicit sex going on, but not much. It's very rare. It's mostly just rumors, but it's probably happened a lot more in the West. It does happen even in Asia, partly just because people are human. It's like lust. A lot of celibate men are struggling with lust, and a ripe peach just falls into their lap. They can't always resist the temptation. So there is that. So let's see. Why does abstinence and moderation exist in Buddhist teachings while at the same time there have been and are many sex cults and gurus within Buddhism, Hinduism promoting group sex and sex with teachers? I don't know of any Buddhist group that promotes group sex and sex with teachers, even though I'm sure it happens. I've heard rumors of it happening with like a relatively famous Burmese monk, two of them that I can think of, and then one kind of non-famous one that I've heard of. And I've read about monks in Thailand that are very shameless in that respect. There was one venerable, what was his name? I don't even remember his name now. It was kind of it was a scandal in the 90s. He was a Thai monk, and he was his books were published for free distribution by charitable organizations, and he was just going around the world giving Dhamma talks and conducting retreats maybe. And finally, they found out that he was calling call girls to his hotel room, and they even had proof because he was paying them with a credit card. And so he was forced, even he was forced by the Thai government or the Thai ecclesiastical council or whatever to disrobe, and he was just denying it to the very end. Um, Although, I mean, the way he was denying it was kind of questionable. He was saying, I do not go to sex place. It is a lie. But I mean, they weren't accusing him of going to a sex place because he was just having the whores delivered to his hotel room. And then I heard later about this same monk, or ex-monk at this point, that he was in prison in America for coming into America with a fraudulent passport or visa. And then after that, I heard years later after that even that he was he was still dressing like a monk in America. He must have gotten out of jail and somehow been allowed to stay instead of being deported, which is the status quo nowadays. And he was like putting on like a toupee and layman's clothing, and they're like taking pictures of him at discos and stuff. People recognizing him. There's this monk or ex-monk still pretending to be one at a disco, and then he apparently got drunk. He was driving drunk and hit somebody and killed them. And then he just kind of went crazy after that, and he's got like wild hair and everything. I mean, it does happen. And humans, I mean, just humans in general, is always going to be weird stuff happening. And I'm sorry, I still can't remember his name. John something. But yeah, I mean, this up here about promoting group sex and sex with teachers. Yeah, I mean, maybe in some like offshoots of Hinduism that can happen. In maybe tantric Buddhism that can happen. But serious Theravada, I mean, even the really liberalized places like Spirit Rock, they are verging on paranoia about even a teacher even touching a student of the opposite gender. Like, I knew this guy, I still know him. He was participating in leading a retreat. I think it was at Spirit Rock. And it was a retreat for teenagers. And there was this one point where this teenage girl is like melting down and crying, telling her story. And all he did was he just kind of put his hand on her shoulder and was like comforting her. And then afterwards, he was taken aside by some of the other teachers and said, "We are really not okay with you touching that girl." And it's like, I mean, there's no harm done. I mean, it was completely non-sexual, but still, I mean, in the West, in Theravada, yeah, they're really, really strict about that, even though still it can happen, slip through the cracks and so forth. But I think I've just been distracted by the whole first part of the question, and I need to continue reading this again. Let's see. Is this just left over from the East-West exchange that took place during the hippie movement? Or is there supposed to be some dharmic path in cuckolding men and turning women out to be religious leaders? Well, a lot of it in the West is kind of the hippie thing, or just not just even just the hippie thing. It's just the sexual license, the sensuality of the West, which is very much restrained in Asia, even in Thailand, where you've got the lady boys and even a prostitute in every village and all that. Still, the monks are supposed to be very strict, and usually they are, but not always. But there have been some teachers, I think Paul Lowe is one of them, that's that there could be a dharmic path in just sort of sexuality, and even like sexuality with someone who is not your spouse and who might even be somebody else's spouse. And yeah, I'm not going to really get into that particular thing, but I mean, I don't think that. I mean, if you go like a wise person goes about certain things in certain ways, then it's not the same as just the drunken guy going out picking up chicks in bars. Well, Osho, who got first pick of all the pretty sannyasins. I mean, I don't know. I mean, Osho, I think I've given my opinion before that he may have attained something higher. He may have been at a higher level of consciousness than the average person in certain ways. But then again, a monkey is at a higher level of consciousness than a sheep, and a monkey's way naughtier than a sheep. Just because you're at some kind of, some higher vibration or something doesn't mean that you're going to be a good boy necessarily. So let's see. People like me who are skeptical of humans running religion see these scenarios play out over and over through our lifetimes. Yeah, not so much with Buddhism that I'm aware of, although it does happen sometimes. And it plays a large part in our skeptical nature via organized religions. How did this sexual dynamic play out in ancient India? Or is this just more American sexual relativism corrupting authentic Buddhism through men who are using Buddhism and other religions as a means to cultivate their own sexual addictions? Yeah, again, with regard to Buddhism, I mean, Buddhism is not nearly as, this kind of thing is not nearly as rampant as, say, homosexuality in the Catholic Church, for example, among the clergy there. With regard to Hindus, I really can't speak very much. And Tibetan monks, there have been quite a few scandals with Tibetan lamas or just Tibetan teachers, but I'm not really well acquainted with Tibetan Buddhism either. And in that case also, you've got this restrained Asian who all of a sudden comes to America where, girls are just dressing like even prostitutes wouldn't dress that way in Asia, Like really, it's like maybe I shouldn't tell that story, but yeah, I mean it's just like wide open. It's like I remember a long time ago, there was some Burmese monks who came to give a retreat in America, probably California, and it was. I mean, the monks were just amazed. It was like a burlesque show. You've got women in shorts and like no bra and everything, like t-shirt with no bra at the meditation retreat. And I mean, the Burmese monks, they'd never been exposed to anything like that before. And I assume a lot of them might just give in and just give in to temptation pretty much like they do with money. Like, you're a poor village monk. You don't get any money, very little anyway. And all of a sudden you come to America and people are just donating, $100 bills. Then, they'll just break. Yeah, a lot of monks have been ruined by the West. Partly just because of the culture is so promiscuous and just sort of promoting sensuality. But again, let's see, how did the sexual dynamic play out in ancient India? Well, you're not going to really see how it plays out in ancient India because, of course, the texts are going to be saying, monks just don't do that. There's like one story of some woman trying to seduce Mahakassapa, who was like the most ascetic of all the Buddha's disciples. And, she's just taking her clothes off and, kind of squirming in front of him and lying down and spreading her legs and everything. And he's just, he just kind of glances at her, just ignores her and just walks away. And that's what you're supposed to do. And there are monks that, I would like to believe that most strict monks would do that. Let's see. Part of the issue is the bad behavior itself. Another part is the hiding, denial, and or enabling of it from the people in authority. Yeah. Yeah, it's again, in Theravada Buddhism, we are relatively free of that, but not entirely free just because the people who participate in Theravada Buddhism are human beings. And animals, human beings are a relatively horny animal as a general rule. So, let's see, what is the gist? What is like the kernel of this question that I guess it'd be at the very beginning here, why does abstinence and moderation exist in Buddhist teachings while at the same time there have been and are many sex cults and gurus? Yeah, in Hinduism, again, there are certain precedents like Krishna and Radha, or Krishna and the 500 gopis. There's this one story, Krishna, he goes to this riverbank and there are 500 cowherd girls. It's a nice round number of 500 of them. And Krishna just multiplied his body into 500 and had sex with all 500 of them simultaneously. Not only that, he had sex with them in just the way they liked it. So, in Hinduism, you got precedents in the scriptures, whereas Theravada is just dry and there's not even a hint of any kind of promotion of that. Even the favored disciples that were lay disciples like Anathapindika, who's like this fabulously wealthy supporter of the Buddha. Even he was supposedly celibate even though he was married. So yeah, it's just going against what the texts teach, what Dharma teaches in Theravada Buddhism. And really, it's mainly Theravada Buddhism that I can speak with any kind of authority. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is also from Arain. And Arain says, if you had to choose between pumpkin pie and key lime pie for Thanksgiving, which would you choose? Yeah, that's like a completely different kind of question there, isn't it? And yeah, definitely key lime pie. I mean, pumpkin pie is very edible. I can sit there and put away pumpkin pie, but, it's just kind of on a scale of like 0 to 10, with the 0 being, you have to spit it out, and 10 being you got to change your underpants after you eat it. It'd be only like a 6, it's just slightly above, the kind of average. Not that I'm complaining, it's like I don't have anything against pumpkin pie. But key lime pie is really good. So yeah, key lime. And let's just move on to the next question here. And this is from Brambo, also known as number 7DD426A8. And Brambo says, what do you think of the Bhikuni Sangha? Ooh, this is a dangerous kind of question. But my personal opinion of the Bhikuni Sangha is that the genuine Bhikuni Sangha went extinct maybe like the 1600s, maybe. It supposedly went extinct before that, but there are chronicles in Burma mentioning Bhikkhunis, around the 1600s. So, yeah, they went extinct. I mean, the Buddha, according to the legend, the Buddha didn't want to ordain Bhikkhunis to begin with. Ananda, as I mentioned a little earlier, talked him into it, just saying, well, I mean, women can become enlightened just like men can. The Buddha had to admit to it. So finally, Ananda talked him into allowing the Buddha's stepmother, also his aunt, because she was both at the same time, into becoming the first bhikkhuni. And after it went extinct, it takes bhikkhunis to ordain bhikkhunis. So once the lineage is broken, it stays broken unless something happens. And it seems to me that there's only 2 ways that the Bhikuni Sangha could legitimately, uncontroversially be revived. One is what the Burmese monks were always telling me. I was talking a little earlier about how there can be instantaneous paranormal sex changes, and there's at least one mention of this in the Buddhist commentaries, where there was this, I can't remember his name, Soraya, I think. There was this rich layman named Soraya who is going by this river, and he sees an arahant monk with this beautiful golden skin bathing in the river, and he just thinks, I wish my wife had skin like that. And because he was so irreverent to this arahant, just immediately, boom, he became a woman. And so, I mean, if a monk has that happen to him, preferably not for, having bad thoughts about an arahant, then he would be a bhikkhuni. He'd still be ordained, so long as there wasn't any interval where he wasn't male or female, he was just kind of a eunuch, because then he would just be excommunicated for being a eunuch, because eunuchs are not allowed to be ordained. So that's one way. Or the other way would, you have to have a great council. There'd be the Sangha of the 4 quarters would convene, and then they would formally decide, all right, the Bhikuni Sangha is going to be revived. We'll just have to break the rules slightly. The first bhikkhunis, they won't be ordained by other bhikkhunis because there aren't any to ordain them. They'll just be ordained by monks. That'll be good enough. And if that were done, then probably. But it's not going to happen realistically, not anytime soon, because the monks who participate in these great councils are very old and conservative, and they don't like to change anything. So instead what you've got is some sort of renegade monks in Sri Lanka and in the West who just say, well, we're just going to ordain nuns just for gender equality, just because it's the right thing to do. But the weird thing about it is that I've talked about this before, where the rules are much stricter for bhikkhunis than for monks. And this is partly because in India, in ancient times and even today, a woman might not even meet her husband until their wedding day. It's a prearranged marriage from childhood. And so, I mean, she might get stuck with this asshole. And so what was happening was a lot of women were just running away to monasteries and becoming nuns just to get away from this asshole of a husband that they never wanted to marry. And in order to make sure that they had a genuine spiritual vocation, that they weren't just getting away from a bad husband or whatever, bad house situation, that they made the rules stricter for nuns. Like, there are 4 parajika rules for monks. If you break any of these 4 rules, you're excommunicated immediately. For bhikkhunis, there are 8. A bhikkhuni isn't even allowed to sit in the presence of a monk. A bhikkhuni, even the most senior bhikkhuni, still has to bow to the most junior monk. They're not even allowed to sit cross-legged. And they're supposed to sit with their feet kind of demurely tucked up to one side, like Burmese ladies sit on mats in Burma even today. And so what the modern bhikkhunis are doing is they're declaring themselves bhikkhunis, and then they're just not following the rules because the rules are discriminatory against women. And the whole thing is just ridiculous because, I mean, the whole purpose is like gender equality. It just seems right that women should be ordained also, even though according to the text, the Buddha didn't even like the idea. But he had to admit that women can become enlightened. So even though it would make problems, he'd say, well, okay, we'll do it then. But they want to become real, genuine bhikkhunis, and then immediately they don't follow the rules correctly. So it seems way better to me. They should just start a new order. It's just ridiculous that really all they want is the official status of being bhikkhuni. And official status is something that they're supposed to be renouncing when you renounce the world. So they could just set up a new order with rules that fit like the modern West, might be exactly equal to the rules for men, but they wouldn't be able to be called bhikkhunis. And it seems like that's the main thing. It's like they want the official status and then they don't follow the rules. So it's just, yeah, I do not consider women calling themselves bhikkhunis nowadays to be like authentically, genuinely ordained bhikkhunis. So anyway, next question from Brambo, also known as number 7DD426A8, is how do they practice differently to bhikkhus in Burma? Well, there are no bhikkhunis in Burma. I have been told that any woman declaring herself a bhikkhuni in Burma will just be jailed. However, there's this next question from Brambo. I noticed they wear pink robes. Could you speak to the social political differences for bhikkhus and bhikkhunis? Well, these women who are nuns wearing pink robes, they're not bhikkhunis. They're called tilashins in Burma. In the Pandita Rama tradition, I think they're called the thekashins, which means like possessors of training, whereas tilashins is possessors of virtue. And I think in Thailand they wear white and are called machi, and I don't know what machi means. Ma is just sort of a feminine word. It might mean just woman or something. So, how do they practice differently to bhikkhus in Burma, and could I speak to the societal political differences for bhikkhus and bhikkhunis? Well, again, in Burma there are no bhikkhunis. In Thailand also, officially, there are no bhikkhunis. It's just kind of a Western, liberal, feminist kind of a thing, mostly. I think the first attempts were in Sri Lanka, but it was already kind of a westernized idea at that time. They were trying to live up to Western ideals or something with regard to female equality. But yeah, it's kind of like a pink and sort of an orangey, salmony kind of color. And could I speak to the societal political differences? Well, I mean, politics is not much to it. They usually follow only 8 or 10 precepts as opposed to the literally thousands that monks are supposed to follow. Bhikkhunis, they'd be following even more rules than the monks, but because they're not bhikkhunis, they only follow 8 or 10 precepts, depending on whether they handle money or not. And they don't have the same respect as as monks, partly because somehow the Burmese have this spiritual materialism where they think that ordination just kind of transcends humanity. It's like if you are an ordained monk, then they don't even call you a human being anymore. The word for human being is not used for monks. So you're like a superhuman being, a monk is. Whereas the bhikkhunis, or I mean, rather the thilashins, they're they receive some respect. Also, they receive kind of some. It's almost like pity. This people kind of feel sorry for them, and so they support them in that way because um, a lot of them, I think probably most of them, are old maids that they weren't pretty enough or rich enough to get a husband, and so they make the most of it and dedicate their lives to religion. And a lot of the time they're almost like servants at some monasteries. They're the ones that are cooking for the monks and that kind of a thing. So there's no equality at all, really. Although in the West, it's almost the opposite. I think bhikkhunis, just partly because it's like politically correct and fashionable, that they might receive more respect than monks in general, unless you're like a really famous, like a high-profile monk. So, yeah, I think I answered that. And I'll just move on to the next question, also from Brambo or number 7DD42688. I follow and read a lot of books and content by monks, but struggle to find inspiring works by nuns. Do you have any recommendations? Well, with regard to Theravada nuns, I'm unacquainted with any book by them. I'm sure they're out there, probably published by like Shambhala or something. There's Pema Chodron. I think she'd be the most famous nun. She's a Tibetan nun, but she's considered to be very wise. I haven't read any of her books. I've read little passages of things that she said. Pema Chodron, is that right? So yeah, I mean, it's even the Theravada, which is it's part of the Pali Tipitaka. It's a Pali text consisting of verses written by enlightened nuns, and the experts, the academic types who study these kind of things, study the grammar and everything. A lot of them are of the opinion that really it's just kind of made up, that most of it was probably written by or composed by monks, just for edification purposes. Although Ambapali's verses in the Theravada are very nice. She was a courtesan. She gave the Buddha one of his last meals before he died. She was a high-class prostitute, essentially. And she was inspired by the Buddha and became a nun. And then the verses, Ambapali's verses, are sort of comparing, how she used to live with how she is now. So it's good. It's worth reading. I'm sure you could find that on the internet easily enough. But whether it was really written by her or composed by even any woman is questionable. So I'll just move on to the next question from Brambo. Are monks and nuns living outside of Sri Lanka aware of the sheer volume of dark magic and sorcery conducted by Sri Lankan monks, often with lay women as the object? Are they aware of the rape, abuse, and sex trafficking? Well, I should have paid more attention to this question before answering Arian's question, because this is probably some kind of Theravada or offshoot of it. Anyway, if so, is this something that is discussed and attempted to be prevented, or is it just accepted as part of the way things are? Does this also happen in Burma and Thailand? I lived in Sri Lanka for 2 years, and I experienced a rather rude awakening whilst unknowingly living in a village that is historically famous for black magic. Your videos have helped me to come to terms with what happened and put my trust where I couldn't anymore. So thank you very much indeed. Well, you're welcome. Yeah, I'd never even heard of this before. Are monks and nuns living aware of the sheer volume of dark magic and sorcery conducted by Sri Lankan monks, often with lay women as the object? Well, I've heard of Burmese monks practicing black magic and necromancy, but it wasn't for the sake of abusing women. I've never heard of that before. So yeah, this is something peculiar to Sri Lanka. I guess. I mean, Sri Lankan monks are very lax. They have a reputation. There are like reform movements in the forests of Sri Lanka, but Sri Lankan monks in general are extremely lax with regard to following the rules. So it wouldn't surprise me. I remember there was one young American monk telling me that he had a Sri Lankan monk tell him that it's not parajika to have sex so long as you practice coitus interruptus. As long as you don't, as long as you pull it out and squirt outside, then it's not parajika, which is just nonsense. So yeah, rape, abuse, and sex trafficking with monks practicing black magic. Yeah, this is the first I've ever heard of it. I mean, it exists. I mean, if it's possible, it's a big world. Then I guess it's happening somewhere. But it's certainly not the norm, and it's certainly not officially condoned by anybody that I'm aware of. So yeah, I'm sorry that it happened, and I would advise people to stay away from villages that are famous for black magic, monks, sorcery. Yeah, that's dangerous. So yeah, yeah. I lived in Burma for 24 years and never heard anything resembling that going on in Burma the whole time I was there. And I mean, when you're a monk, you're behind the scenes. Monks are really good at a kind of hypocrisy where they'll act holy in front of the lay people who are their donors, but then when they're by themselves, they're just giggling and joking and just fooling around and behaving inappropriately in certain ways. But yeah, so I've lived behind the scenes. I've seen what monks are like when nobody's looking, and still I've never heard anything remotely resembling this. So it's probably, I mean, the Thais are pretty naughty too, and the Sri Lankans are just extremely lax in their practice. But in Burma, first of all, they're very stoic. They're like Spartan in Burma. They're just not a sensual people. They don't care what their food tastes like. They just sleep on like wooden boards. They just don't care. And they're just not a very like a romantic, sensual kind of people. And so that kind of thing is just less likely to happen in Burma just because of the national character, maybe. So anyway, I'll just move on to the next question. This is turning into a long one. This is from Matthew. And Matthew said, "How do you feel about Mahasi Sayadaw's book, Practical Insight Meditation? I love the brevity. Do you think he is a fraud, or is there some pragmatic information in there?" I think I've got the little booklet up on the shelf there. Practical Insight Meditation. I think it was just a transcript of a talk that he gave to beginners at a retreat that was considered to be so good that they just wrote it down. I think they recorded it also. And so you just, like beginners would just hear the recording of Mahasi Seattle or the English translation if they're foreigners. So it's good advice. I do not consider Mahasi Seattle to be a fraud. The Mahasi meditation tradition, it's good for beginners and intermediate practitioners, but once you get up to like the intermediate level, you should probably move on to a different method. I once asked one of the wisest Burmese monks I knew, Sayadaw U Vimalaramsi, what he thought of the Mahasi tradition, and he said, "You can get benefit from practicing it, but it is a limited method." And I agree with that. It'll take you up to a certain level, and then I don't think it's really equipped to deal with higher levels. Or if it does, it just kind of happens spontaneously to a monk who's like really ripe. He's like really good at meditation. You can get up into these levels, but generally they'll take you up to like what they consider to be the level of a sotapanna or stream enterer, and then that's it. You finish the course. You're done. And then you just start reading the paper and listening to the radio and goofing around. Like at a Mahasi meditation center, the ones that are the Aryas, the Sotapannas, because they're the ones that aren't practicing. They're the ones goofing around. So, but I mean, Mahasi Seattle himself was not a fraud. I mean, he had some wisdom. He was definitely very intelligent. And there is pragmatic information in there. So, I'll say that much. So I'll just move on to the next question. And I shouldn't skip a week. And this is what happens when I skip a week. The list becomes so long. Not that I'm complaining. You're all welcome to ask questions. It's good for you. This is from Tarot Reader, or Tarot Reader. Why don't you discuss totalitarian, fascist, emerging New World Order? Well, actually, I kind of do sometimes. Like the latest blog post that I wrote, which is discussing the midterm elections in America. Yeah, it's kind of moving a little bit in that direction. There's a few hints tossed out there, but yeah, I call it the brave new world order. But whether it's really fascist or not, I suppose it's going to become more fascist as they gain more control. And totalitarian, yeah, I mean even some of the social media are already getting totalitarian, where you just are not allowed to discuss forbidden subjects, regardless of how true they might be. So, why don't you discuss totalitarian, fascist, emerging New World Order? Yeah, you might want to look at Brian Ruhe's channel on BitChute. He's more into that than I am. I'm more just, I call them as I see them, and I talk about Buddhism or just other things from a kind of a Buddhist perspective. Sometimes I'll point out that Buddhism really is not equipped to deal with certain things in the secular world, like violence. But yeah, I mean, if you look at my blog, you'll find that kind of stuff. I mean, there are certain tags you can look up, like culture war and neo-Marxism and that kind of thing. So yeah, I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Ruhe. And Ruhe says, hello, Panyo. Don't know if this question will make through, but here goes. Looking at the mind, sitting, standing, walking, lying down, I've come to see it as an impersonal or non-personal mega-narrative. Maybe that's meta-narrative. It's got a G in it, though. Building machine. Okay, I've come to see it as an impersonal or non-personal mega-narrative building machine. This insight is certainly not new, but I wonder whether this view or looking is a direct experience of anatta that is always available and right at hand. Well, yeah, anatta is always available, just an insight into no self. The meat puppet isn't you. Yeah, that would be, if you see clearly enough, you'll see it. And there's probably levels of your consciousness that are seeing it all the time. It's just that your mind is making so much noise, you're just distracted by all the thoughts and the perceptions and so forth, and you don't notice some of this stuff that's always there. So, yeah, the mega narrative or meta narrative building machine, yeah, I don't understand that part. So I'll just move on to the next question, and this is from Matthew. I think there was another one from Matthew. Maybe it was a different Matthew. I don't know. Sorry, Matthew. But this is from Matthew. And Matthew says, is there any schools within Theravada that teach pragmatic meditation, both jhana and insight? Do you believe that there are some sincere teachers who can teach and enjoy it? Well, Pa Auk teaches jhana. And the insight is, it comes in. He's very strict. I don't know if Pa Sayadaw is even alive anymore. He's left Pa Auk Doya, or he did that several years ago. But yeah, there are teachers who teach both jhana and insight. The founder of the tradition which I was ordained, Venerable Tongpulu Sayadaw, who has now passed away, he taught samatha and vipassana. He taught like samadhi-based meditation and also mindfulness-based meditation, which is good. I think it's probably best for a monastic, a renunciant especially, to practice jhana while sitting and then be practicing mindfulness when doing anything else. And there are teachers that teach that. Nowadays, I'm not sure who the teachers would be, though, to tell you the truth. It might be Western monks might be better at it than Asian monks. So, it could be even Ajahn Tanisaro, like around San Diego in California. He might teach both. I assume he does. So, yeah. So the answer to that is yeah. Both jhana and insight. Yeah, I mean, according to the text, insight can arise from jhana. You know, you have like the jhana experience, and then after you come down from that, then there's like, I mean, it's called review or something, but it's just, I mean, you can just get struck by things. It's like some insights that arise. I mean, they might not be on the official list of insights, but you can still have powerful insights. Like you practice a meditation method similar to jhana, where you just stop thinking, your mind is just clear, you know, like glass. And when you come out of that, I mean, there's the insight that wow, it's like when you stop thinking, it's just not blank unconsciousness. You can stop thinking, your mind is just clear, you know, and not even really perceiving anything necessarily, and you're more awake, you're more conscious than when you're not doing it. It's like it's not you, because you know it can stop and you don't die, you know, you don't go into a coma. So yeah, I mean, if you can't find a teacher who teaches it, it's right there in the suttas. You can study the suttas. So I'll just move on to the next question. This is from Chaplin. If you had to guess about what percentage of American Buddhists are practicing authentic Dharma that has not been corrupted by Western culture? Well, I divide that into two groups. You've got the monks and you've got the lay people. And with regard to the monks, it might be as high as 50%. I mean, there's always going to be certain corruptions, but it's not going to be so much corruptions by Western culture. Like it could be corruptions by traditional Thai culture, like the monks that they go to Thailand or they're following a Thai tradition, which is probably most Western monks are following a Thai tradition, especially the Ajahn Chah tradition. And there are corruptions in Dharma that are just traditional Thai culture or traditional Burmese culture. But there's not a whole lot of corruption by Western culture, unless they're just really into YouTube and electronic gadgets and stuff. With regard to lay people, what percentage of American Buddhists are practicing authentic Dharma that has not been corrupted by Western culture? I'd guess it would be very few, probably less than 5%. Just because Western culture is so pervasive, and because you're a layperson, you're not renouncing Western culture, you're still in Western culture, and it's just going to have a corrupting influence on Dharma because Western culture just is not particularly dharmic. So there is that. And I'm going to just move on to the next question. I think this is the very last question. Boom. Just snuck up on me. So this very last question of the evening, or whatever time of day you're watching this, is from Motorhead. And Motorhead says, been experiencing some very vivid dream meditation states recently and seeing through the illusion of our dream consciousness, dreaming of our reality type insights. Still getting strong synchronicity with you and Brian. Can you say anything about this? And other people I know feel the same. This is kind of a tough one because I'm not exactly sure what he's referring to. He's been experiencing some very vivid dream meditation states recently and seeing through the illusion of our dream consciousness. I assume it's like while sitting in meditation, he's having like vivid like dream images. I mean, that's happened to me before. Or could it be, he's like lying down and kind of dreaming, and I assume meditation lying down doesn't work very well because you fall asleep too easily. But for most people. So I assume what he means here is while he's practicing some kind of sitting meditation, or maybe even walking meditation, he's having vivid dream states and seeing through the illusion of our dream consciousness. Yeah, well, I mean, this is a dream where this is not reality. This really is not reality. It's like a virtual reality. It's kind of like the Matrix, except it's probably not a big computer that we're in. Still getting strong synchronicity with me and Brian. That's good. Yeah, I've had people comment on that where, yeah, well, we'll tell a story about our life, and it's like the same thing that happened to them, that kind of thing. Um, yeah, I really can't say much about it though because I don't know exactly what is being referred to here. It's kind of a vague statement without much concrete content that I can really get a grip on. So I'm sorry, Motorhead. Maybe you can ask again uh, in a in like different words. But that's it. My golly, we finished it. It's less than 2 hours, barely. So yeah, if you have any questions, especially about Buddhism or philosophy, spirituality, meditation, Burma, me personally, anything you think I might be able to answer, any question you think I might be able to answer, feel free to ask them. And do please ask them like in the comments under a Q&A video, or if you have access to the Discord server, you can ask them there. There's even a Q&A room there. Or if you have access to my Subscribestar account, then you can ask your questions there. But lately, especially, some people are asking questions in odd places, and I can't guarantee that I'll see it and put it on the list if it's in an unusual place that you ask the question. If you send me an email personally, then yeah, I'll see it and then I'll write it down. But like an old video, I've had people ask questions to like Q&A number 2 just recently, and it's like, I mean, I see the notifications sometimes, but yeah. So if you have any questions, just include them in the. I guess the easiest would be in the comments below, and all my links are down below, including the links to my books and so forth. So just take a look at that and like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Just smash that like button, as they say, and be happy.